Thank you very much indeed. So I'm kind of, before this session I was thinking, yeah, we're going to head either down the M4, go to Paddington and go to South East Wales. So that's, we're in South East Wales. If you weren't expecting to be in South East Wales, then you're probably in the wrong room. So we have a very esteemed panel with us today. We have Kellie Beirne from Cardiff Capital Region. We have Louise Harris from Tramshed Tech. Oh my God, that's a bit of a tongue twister. I didn't say it out loud before today. Owen Wilce, who's also from Cardiff Capital Region, and Robert Jamieson, who's from an organisation called PPL, and he's a principal consultant here. So we are going to be looking, and you would have seen from the programme, we're going to be looking at how devolved powers can be leveraged to fuel innovation-led inclusive growth. And I'm not going to say too much because I think these are the experts on Wales. I don't want to say too much. I am going to go into our very first question for this afternoon. And the first question I have to each of the panel, if we can go in the order in which, Kellie will start first. I just want to ask, so innovation and devolution are often discussed separately, but in what ways do they intersect? And how does that look in South East Wales? Kellie.
Yeah, so I'll start off if that's okay. So I think I outlined this morning really that we've recognised for some time that if we're going to take our economy to where it needs to be, part of the issue for us in terms of lower than average productivity is that the fact that we probably don't have the innovation ecosystem in place in the way that we'd like it. So for some years now we've been embarking on a process which helps us create those conditions, the stickiness that we need. We've had so many science innovation audits, the biannual innovation surveys that tell us that we have innovation strengths in Cardiff Capital Region, but we probably just don't have all of those structural and systemic things in place which enable us to repeat success and have a formula for how we create it. So as I was saying today, I think the benefit of having a place-based approach is we can really think about the kinds of issues that we're trying to tackle. So along the M4 corridor, as I was saying this morning, where we've got cities, urban areas, we do have pockets of deprivation, but we've got relative levels of high prosperity, productivity. It's when you go into some of our Northern Valleys communities, sort of 30 miles up the road, that you get really endemic issues associated with higher than average rates of child poverty. Seriously, there's one valley I can think of, it's about 5 miles from top to bottom, and there's life expectancy differentials there of 7-10 years from the top of the valley to the bottom. So we've got to think about innovation, I think, in not just a place-based way, but a way that allows us to tackle societal issues, not just economic ones. So I think the really important principle to the 10 politicians that I'm privileged to work with in the Cardiff Capital Region is that this stuff we do called economic growth, it can't just be the end in itself. It's got to be a means of tackling some of these wider issues. And because innovation does genuinely need to go to all places, we have to define it differently. Yes, the work universities do is really important. Yes, the work that the private sector, businesses, technologists, entrepreneurs do is important, but we've got a big public services footprint. We've got to make public services innovative because that will drive productivity and prosperity benefits. We've got to think about our care, tourism, food, agricultural, high street sectors, because if we can make those as innovative as possible, that will drive higher growth, help us tackle poverty and put more money in people's back pockets. So thinking about innovation, I think, in a richer way is definitely something we can do from a regional footprint. And in Wales, we have, I guess, they're the equivalent of combined authorities in England. Now wait for it, because you'll never forget this term once I've mentioned it. They're called corporate joint committees in Wales, which I know doesn't roll off the tongue, but they're corporate legal entities, and what they seek to do is to bring together a more integrated approach to regional public investment. So we can think about better policy making, we can think about more innovative investment frameworks, because I think that is key to really designing and delivering the kinds of innovation and therefore the kinds of growth we want to see. but also about different, more effective governance, which isn't just about our political leaders. One of the things that I think is fairly innovative about what we've done is to try and create much more distributed leadership, much more of a networked approach, recognising that in the public sector, we probably don't have all the answers. In fact, sometimes I'm not sure we're even asking the best questions we could be. So thinking about how we bring others in and have them as part of that collective decision-making process, bringing their influence, their skills, their capacities, usually pro bono, which helps. I call them our off-payroll resource, I think is a massive boon for the work that we're trying to do. And I think some of those ingredients help regions take a place-based approach and be more self-determinist and therefore more innovative.
That's great, and I think we'll hear a little bit more from you later around the detail on how you're doing that. Louise, what have you got to say on that?
I think it's really interesting if you haven't visited South Wales or you haven't been part of our ecosystem. It's very similar to other ecosystems around the UK, but also very different as well. So we have a few additional layers, which sometimes makes things a little bit more complicated. But as an entrepreneur myself, it also creates greater opportunity. So the more layers and the more organisations we can interact with, the better. My day-to-day role is basically helping the tech ecosystem in Wales to scale out. And when I started that, probably about 10 years ago, it was because I had a tech company of my own. And as a female founder in South Wales, I found it almost impossible to do the things that a growing and scaling business needs to do. So, of course, I needed to raise investment for my tech to scale out. Found that really, really difficult. Couldn't get investors to come past Bristol. I needed amazing talent, so I needed to be able to attract talent into the business. And I also needed to create amazing innovation partnerships. And all of those things were really, really difficult in South Wales. I'm pleased to say that things have really moved on over the last 10 years, and actually working with the Joint Committee, working with Welsh Government, with other local partners, we have really started to build out that ecosystem to a point now where we actually have quite a healthy inward investment pipeline, not just our own homegrown companies. We've still got a long way to go. I would say that there are many parts of our ecosystem that I think Kellie alluded to aren't quite stacked in the right way. I think about innovation ecosystems like Lego. I'm a big Lego fan. And when I go around the world and visit other ecosystems, they've all got the same Lego blocks. We've all got the same blocks to play with. But what I find as I visit those ecosystems is that they're stacked and they're built in slightly different ways. So I would say our core foundation of our Lego blocks has started to build really well, but perhaps some of those blocks, as we build them out, need to move around and change a little bit. So
Tetris.
Tetris, perhaps, yeah.
We're going to fit it all together. So you're talking about bringing those fragmented parts together with the help of the public sector.
Yeah, you need the whole ecosystem to make it really work for entrepreneurs and founders to scale out their businesses. They need those core things that any business needs. And it's really tempting as a founder, as an entrepreneur, to just go to London. Because I can quite easily find the things I need there. And frustratingly, when I really started out and I was building software, I found myself coming to London 2 or 3 times a week, working with young people from the valleys that Kellie's talking about. And that was really frustrating for me. And I wanted to create something that meant that they could come at home or stay at home. That's the idea.
Okay, fantastic. We'll sit here for some more from you. Owen.
I think I'll build on Louise's Lego analogy. I'm a public service innovation lead at Cardiff Capital Region. I think even the title should give you an indication of the investment as an organisation that we are making to ensure that that critical piece of Lego, then to continue that analogy, is as productive as it possibly can be. Because if if good, inclusive economic growth is our goal and innovation is our vehicle, we must improve our public sector productivity, and that's the journey that we've been on that perhaps I can expand on a little bit later, but building skills, capacity, confidence, conditions, and also, I think, was mentioned in an early keynote, what we've been doing is creating spaces for those sectors to come together, because what we found, we did have skills, knowledge, mindset gaps. We definitely had a challenge with confidence, but we also don't talk to one another enough. And Kellie's point around asking better questions, that's what we've been focused on. Define the problems that we have, of which there are many, and bring people together around them.
That's fantastic. So we're going to make the Lego pieces work better. Fueled by the public sector helping you guys. Robert, what do you want to add to this question?
I was never really into Lego, but,
We're not sponsored by Lego. I think they should be sponsored.
I am.
it's a cracking analogy. I think what I'd add, more from the perspective of a delivery partner of the Cardiff Capital Region, you know, we've heard throughout today around, this may be oversimplifying it, but the importance of collaboration. And I think we're really attracted to CCR's ability to convene across sectors, across organisations, with real credibility and purpose. So that's one thing. I think, in addition, the programmes that we're leading on are rooted in experimentation and innovation and testing new ideas. And one of the fantastic things about CCR's kind of regional profile is there's a direct route to scale and spread successful interventions. So if you're looking to help accelerate and achieve impact, like PPL is, CCR is a fantastic partner.
Right, and they didn't pay you to say that. Good. Thank you so much. There's a lot that we can learn from your experience in South East Wales. Kellie, I want to come on to, because I visited the CCRs, they can be my acronyms, the Cardiff Capital Region's website, and it's definitely, innovation is all over it. So you really get a sense that this is something that you firmly believe in. So do you want to say a little bit more about how you're reimagining the role of the public sector in unlocking innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I love the public sector. You know, I've worked, well, since I've always worked in the public sector, I haven't. I've worked in the private sector as well. But I believe I'm a vocational public servant. It matters to me to be in public service, but it also frustrates the hell out of me sometimes. And I think that, you know, we've got to think about things like risk differently. You know, the public sector has to be able to take, you know, risk, not in a reckless way. You know, we've got to take risk in a balanced way, but that risk has to be proportionate to reward, and we have to do it with responsibility because we're dealing with public money. And sometimes I feel like we're assessed on, you know, the risks of doing things as opposed to the risk of not doing anything. I mean, does an auditor ever come in and hold you to account on the things you haven't done? You know, is this failure by omission thing? You know, that's the thing that worries me. So really trying to sort of rethink some of the principles, the different type and scale of interaction that we need across public, private sectors, working with universities, FE colleges, the third sector. But I think, you know, just really trying to, if we could start again and think about the kind of statecraft that we need to make things happen in the public sector, how would that look? And, you know, I'm not trying to say we need to be like the private sector. We don't. But I think I kind of see it as civic regard in entrepreneurship. You know, trying to do the things to get the returns, to get the momentum, the opportunity that we can keep putting back into the pot to seed and catalyse the next thing. Not to have dependency cultures where we're great at bidding for projects, but we give ourselves the capability, I think, to sort of fund and invest in things and become stewards of the public balance sheet, bringing together all of the different capitals that I think we are uniquely placed to convene around. Physical capital, commercial, financial, you know, human capital. That should be the job, I think, of the public sector. So we're having a go in Cardiff Capital Region. I guess we learn more by doing. You know, I'm not sure there's any textbook for this stuff. really quite taken with the sort of missions theme. So we've been trying to do some of that around what are the big challenges that we should be convening around, be they economic, environmental or societal. And how can we work through a process of research and development in the public sector? I know we associate that term with, you know, research and the private sector, but how do we do it in the public sector in a safe way? We can't be reckless about these things. But I think, yeah, some of these principles really do need to extend to the modern narrative, I think needs to frame contemporary public services. As I say, it's hard and we make loads of mistakes. But another thing is we have to be open to making mistakes as well, because how are we ever going to know if we don't try? And I think it comes back to this failure by omission thing. We've just got to get our heads around that new sense of what public service could be and be about.
It's really interesting because, like you, I've worked primarily in the public sector. And of course, we're in a climate now where local authorities are really struggling financially. So really interesting to watch what you're doing in Cardiff Capital Region. I want to move on to just looking at, there's a timer down there, which is quite helpful, to Louise. Louise, can you tell us about Tramshed and how it's helped to accelerate innovation?
Sure. Perhaps before I move on to that, just to pick up on something Kellie said there, I think one of the things that I find so remarkable about Cardiff Capital Region, and I think, you know, it's difficult sometimes to sit as an entrepreneur that spends every day taking risks, to hear that the public sector is held to account on some of the really exciting and innovative things that they look to do. But I think the way that CCR has approached the missions and those real world problems that are affecting the man and the woman on the street, I think that has really meant that you can go at it in a different way. So I think that's been very encouraging from the private sector to see the public sector. It's not in a reckless, risk-taking way, but it's really focused on, if we do this, will it make a difference for the people that matter? And I think that's something that isn't always held to account across other parts of the UK.
Sounds like a good starting point.
Yeah, great starting point. So I just wanted to pick up on that point.
Thank you.
In terms of Tramshed, I mentioned earlier, I started it because I had my own tech company. And like all great innovations, it starts with a challenge, a problem that you're trying to solve. And it was my own problem in terms of not being able to scale that business in the way that I wanted to. And I was back and forward to London, as I mentioned, and working with some fantastic young people from South Wales. And I remember one day being incredibly tired with a very young family and saying to these young people I was working with in London, why don't you come back? Why don't you come back to Wales? What is it that isn't there? What's here that you're looking for? And they said, they looked around this really grotty co-working space near Smithfields Market. If you've been there, you'll know the one I mean, with cats on the desk. And they said, oh, there's nothing like this in Wales. And so when I went back on the train, in my mind, the innovation around the tech ecosystem was about space. So I thought that I had to find a building. That was my first challenge. And I found this if anyone's been to Tramshed, our HQ, you'll know it's a very, very long, red brick, leaky building. It actually didn't have a roof when I first came across it. And I knew that it was owned by the local authority. So I went to speak to the Cardiff local authority. And I said, look, guys, this is what I want to do. I want to create a thriving tech ecosystem. There's going to be hundreds of people working here. It's going to be based on a membership, because that was my understanding of co-working spaces at the time. And I really want you to give me that building. And they said, that sounds like a really stupid idea. Nobody will understand memberships. That's a gym thing. It's not a work thing. You've got to remember this was pre-COVID. And therefore, you know, we don't think this is a great idea. And in fact, we already do tech innovation ourselves. We have our own enterprise centres. I said, great, let me come and have a look at these enterprise centres. And I went to visit one. There was nobody there. And I thought, okay, this is not what I was thinking. This is not what I'd seen in London. So I just knocked on their door like once every other week and said, please, 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 let me go into that building. And eventually I think they just caved in, because I was a complete pain in the backside. So I had this business plan, and I think that business plan was all around space. It was get a building, make it look cool, make it look like London, and people will come. And in year 3 of this business plan, I had written a part of the year 3 plan, which was we'll start to support businesses with some programs, and we'll start to invite investors to come to Wales to hopefully invest in those scaling companies. And like any good business plan, I had to rip it up in like week 3. It wasn't year 3, it was week 3 that the first company walked through the door and said, I'm trying to raise investment, I'm having really trouble doing it, I've got this great bit of software, can you help me? And that was the moment when I realized that ecosystem innovation is not just about space. And when I say space, I mean the physical building. It's a necessary evil in my mind. You have to have it. You have to have the building, but they cost a lot of money. As I said, our particular building was very leaky and cold when we first took it over. But I realized that that was one of the building blocks. So I then started to travel around the UK, working with some brilliant partners, and got to travel further afield to look at other ecosystems that we're building. And that was when I realized that actually the space and the place part of it was just a launch pad, a catalyst, if you like. And actually it was the support in terms of the programs and the investment support that you could give businesses that would really drive that forward. So we're now 7 locations across Wales. We are hopefully looking to add to that portfolio later on this year. And we work with around about 4,500 businesses now right across the UK, not just in Wales. But it was because of the programs and because of the investors that started coming to that space that really led to our success, really.
That's absolutely amazing. I mean, I wish we had time on this panel for me to ask the plethora of questions I've got for you about that, but maybe in the networking sessions afterwards. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really inspiration. So on to Owen. Can you give us some examples of the work that your organisation is actually doing on the ground on supporting cross-sector innovation?
Yeah, certainly. I think between Robert and I, we'll cover off 2 examples.
Partnership in action.
Yeah, absolutely. That we've put into action. I suppose as a response to everything that Robert, Louise, and Kellie has mentioned. There are 450,000 of us in public service in Wales. We spend around 10 billion on procuring goods as a public service. We, despite the weaknesses that I mentioned earlier, in terms of the strength and the opportunity, we knew that we must invest in our public sector around innovation, but we must do that in a cross-sector, collaborative way. So one of the tangible examples is our local wealth building challenge fund. So an £8.2 million investment from our wider investment fund. And what we've done is we've run 8 different challenges. So the challenge owners are public sector bodies who have spent some time defining the problem. Many of them have also interacted with our sister program, which is Innovative Future Services, or Infuse for short, which Robert will talk to you about the current iteration. But back to Challenge Fund. To give you something that perhaps means more than me just spouting figures around the collaborative projects. Within Wales, we've got 30,000 people waiting on our NHS waiting list for endoscopy. Though some of those individuals can wait up to 55 weeks for non-urgent procedure and up to 44 weeks for an urgent procedure. If you just put yourself in their position for the minute, the fear that comes with something like that. What we did is we spanned that challenge out from Cardiff and Vale Health Board, working with through an innovation partnership with a local business called IQ Endoscopes, who've developed a single-use endoscope, which has a lower carbon footprint than the reusable scope, significantly, more than half. And what that means is not only can that procedure be offered in primary care, but also at the bedside. So we are ensuring that people come out from hospital much quicker, which is a key systemic problem for us. We have invested 750,000 in this particular investment. More than 5 million of private sector leverage has been developed as a result. People within our communities will feel an immediate impact from that. I just wanted to share that, Claudette, as a very real-world example of how we're approaching cross-sector innovation. There is an academic team called CEDA that sit alongside them that are doing economic impact assessments. So it was mentioned a lot this morning, private, public, third sector, academia working together. That's very much what we see as the future, and both Kellie and Louise have mentioned missions. I think these are the prototypes and the stepping stones that allow us to be confident to move to a missions-led approach because we understand what works. And I think Robert will talk to the Infuse collision space, which for me is the closest that we've ever got to the right conditions for genuine cross-sector innovation and scale and adoption.
That sounds so impressive, and also just the way in which you demonstrated that it impacts the people on the ground. So,
that's what matters to us.
yeah, fantastic. So, Robert,
No
tell us
pressure.
about Infuse.
Infuse Innovative Future Services. So in a nutshell, it is a structured innovation program where we convene groups of participants that are drawn from the private sector, the voluntary community sector, and our 10 local authorities across the region, and set them a challenge. So in the latest iteration, it was how to support a just transition to net zero in public sector transportation. So brought together these people, set them the problem. The real value in Infuse is it's protected time away from the grind to really dig into a challenge. We get to leverage the fantastic expertise and experience that's embedded in the region. And then we encourage them to develop and test ideas that would meet those challenges in the form of experiments. So I think one of the key things is it's protected time, but also it de-risks some of the innovation. It allows people to test ideas, generate feedback, iterate them. And then we culminate with a pitching session where we bring together the great and the good of the region. So these are academics, these are subject matter experts, these are policymakers. And we give our participants a chance to pitch for funding, for support, and Louise attended our last event. And as Owen set the trend, I will focus on impact, because that's what we're here to deliver, that's why we're all here. I see the impact for Infuse through two lenses. The first is the impact on the participant. Originally, we recruited from the public sector, but as Owen's alluded to, we've broadened that out because it's fundamentally important that we are genuinely cross-sector in this. But people are often jaded. They have to navigate, challenges in terms of bureaucracy, risk aversion in the organisations. And actually, what we've seen is it's a huge development opportunity for people. People see there's a different way of doing things. They really value in working with their peers. And so there's that real mindset shift that we see that there is another way forwards. We've worked with over 100 people now, and we're really seeing a ripple effect across the region where people go back into their organisations and take the skills and tools and frameworks that they've developed. But it's also about impact on the challenge that we've set them. So in this instance, it was about a just transition to net zero. I'll give you one quick story. We had our man Owen from Merthyr Tydfil, small local authority in Cardiff, grand ambitions to completely electrify his fleet in Merthyr. And he was at about 30%, so that's why he came to the challenge. Rob, help me out. It's like, it's all on you, Owen. Halfway through the challenge, he was like, you know what, it's not for me. I don't see how we can address this financial issue, because for him, the price of electric vehicles compared to internal combustion engine or diesel vehicles wasn't compatible. So through the program, we linked him up with a fintech firm, we linked him up with a local electrical vehicle provider, and he tested out a new procurement mechanism. Fast forward to the end of the program, he's managed to procure 16 vehicles. Over the lifespan of the 7 years, would lead to 40 grand's worth of savings in the running costs, reduction in carbon emissions, and he's now at 40% of his fleet in terms of electrification. So He's developed an idea, he's tested the concept, and as I mentioned in my first answer, through the CCR and the region, we've got a view of scaling and spreading that good practice. So start small, develop, test, iterate, and then scale and spread.
That's amazing. Could you say a little bit more about how he saved that through procuring? And what was the...
It's interesting because I guess procurement was key here. And what we ended up finding is, well, matched him up with some alternative finance, which helped address the kind of cost implications. But he did his own kind of market shaping where he took a quote, went to his old provider and went, well, these blokes are giving it to me for this price. And they then matched it. And so then he procured a further. So it was just, again, that different mindset, just a practical application. And again, but for us, potential to scale and spread, and that's key.
Absolutely superb. So great. I'm very inspired by Wales today. Yeah, Wales.
Can I just add something? I know we're running out of time, but don't underestimate as well the power of those particular events and the ones that I attended to really make the private sector feel included. I was sat with quite a few private sector partners, some of our customers, and they were saying it's absolutely fantastic to actually know what the public sector's doing. And that knowledge sharing, newsletters can go out all day long, but I don't think companies always get the time to digest the innovations that are happening in the public sector. And I think if that power to convene that CCR has shouldn't be underestimated, because I know the private sector have really appreciated that and are looking forward to it now scaling.
But I think, Lou, it pinpoints the private sector to where the big growth opportunities are going to be.
Yeah.
So it's win-win, isn't it?
Yeah.
Often these things are very simple in terms of tell people, CPC, also a convener, got a shout out to Connected Places Catapult, but actually just the fact that you have these opportunities and you're communicating them. Owen?
Yeah, just on that Connected Places Catapult link, I think it's important just to highlight some of the interactions that we've had with Sam and others at the Catapult. So for us to think long and hard about our position as place leaders, myself and Louise have been part of a team on something called the Innovation Places Leadership Academy, teamed up with East Midlands, with Newcastle, with Sheffield, all city regions still struggling with that deindustrialisation challenge and how we really drive economic growth. We mentioned procurement a couple of times, and I'm sure you'll see or hear from our input that we're passionate about something that's not always seen as the most sexy thing in public service, but in terms of a tool, back to that £10 billion challenge, the Innovation Places, Innovation Procurement Empowerment Centre, IPEC, we've had colleagues that have worked across both of those, so we've been able to kind of glean information from both paths, if you like, that have been trodden around public sector procurement.
Fantastic. So, and I've heard Sam talk at length, sorry, not in a boring way, but about, he talks at length about the power of procurement and in fact, Kellie, you talked about, at the beginning, you talked about what the public sector, the power that it really has. And if you have that will, very, very convincing from our panels today. Sam, do I have time for questions? Are there any questions from...
Someone's gentleman.
Oh, please do ask. Do you want to say who you are? And
Andrew Ross from Purple Garden. A question for Kellie. You referred to the 30-mile horizon of deprivation suddenly appearing and poverty and low life expectancy.
did everyone hear that? Yeah, people, you can carry on.
Rural communities in Wales, agricultural communities, farming communities, are deeply resistant to net zero and nature-based solutions as any kind of benefit. Are you missing the vocabulary that would enable you to persuade them that they have a new industry in front of them, which is indeed a new technology?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, there's a lot of work going on around this in Wales with the Farmer Union Wales spearheading a bit of a movement now linked to not just food production, but river quality, water quality. So I think it's starting to permeate that narrative. In fact, one of the companies that we work with has got a big project on bringing different sectors, different groups, agencies, individual agricultural agencies together to look at things like pollution, river quality. And do you know what? For the first few meetings, they just couldn't be in the same room together. It was really very spirited, if I can put it like that. But I think, yeah, it was, and volatile as well, extremely volatile. Such was the strength of feeling. But it probably needed those first few sessions to get that out. And then what we quickly found was that people were coming to the table with solutions, different ideas. Still a lot of dissonance, still a lot of disagreement, but a respect, I think, for hearing those different ideas. So one of the things I think a lot about is rural innovation, because we do have a big rural hinterland. Huge opportunities, particularly going back to some of those foundational everyday economies that I was talking about. But yeah, I think to myself, why do we not apply an innovative lens as much to some of those sectors as we do to big tech and science and R&D based discovery? And I think we all found in the pandemic, they were the sectors, food, high streets, care, that we were, supermarkets, we were absolutely reliant on them. So I think there's some ethical questions there about how much we value some of these sectors and the efforts that we can make. So I don't think there's any quick and easy answers, but I think convening the space for discussions, however tense they may get, and this particular one that I can think of around the farming community has taken years. But they're off now, and they might just come across a solution.
And I'll just add to that as well, pointing them to real-world case studies, user cases of parts of the world that have already made those leaps of faith into new technologies. And this year is the year of Wales in Japan. And CCR and myself have been recently on a trip to Japan looking at very similar geographical areas and some of the ways that they've pushed forward with agri-tech and the changes that's made in a very traditional country, and bringing some of those examples back to help others to really embrace the change that's happening, whether we like it or not.
Thank you very much. Now, I had 2 minutes ago a sign saying 2 minutes, and I reckon that our 2 minutes are up. So I'm afraid we don't have any time for any more questions. Can we just say thank you to our panelists for a really, really stimulating discussion?